26, 27.
26, we're going to start here. Start 26 year. Finishing 26 year. Started noon, beginning of noon vav.
So, 27?
Starting 27 soon. Arsh Chayesor, noon vav.
Ruchem Aboim B'Shem Hashem, Shem Issur Torah. I'd like to welcome everyone back to the 27th year of the Sunday Shiurim of Rabbi Yakov Zad Smith Shlita with the Issur Torah. I'd like to give a shekayach to Moshe Klein, sponsoring today's Shir, Lili Nishmas Oviv, Rabbi Shol Bar Moshe Menachem, Rabbi Shalom Yatzevov El, Te Nishmas Issur B'Tzar Chaim. To have the great schus of sponsoring a Shir or putting an ad in the dinner journal for the annual dinner of Issur Torah this Wednesday. Call Issur Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. We'll cover the call on Rabbi Smith for today's share on the Kaddish, Yasom in Halacha. Rabbi Smith.
Shalom Aleichem, it's good to be back. We learn once again Rabbi. I was thinking that probably the most underappreciated part of our davening is the Kaddish that we say. If you make a cheshbon, it's the most often repeated tefillah. We say it 7 times in Shacharis, 3 times in Mincha, and Meir, if you daven Nusach Sfarad, 4 times. You're talking about 13 or 14 times you say it in davening every day. And yet it doesn't really get the cheshivas that it deserves. Look at the Gemara, Lamashal. There's a lot to say about Kaddish, but just suffices to say the Gemara says in Brachas, Daf Gimel, when the Yidden say Kaddish, Yesh Rabbi in Shul, the Rebbe Shalom responds, Ashri HaMelech shemekalsa noisai beveisoi kach, Malay la'ov shehiglas bonav, Oilam labonim shegolom al shulchan aviyam. The Kaddish elicits such a response, such a avas Hashem. The Rebbe Shalom has rachmanis on us and thinks about the Geula. So obviously there's more to the Kaddish than we understand. Also I should mention the Gemara says in Shabbos Kuf Yotes, so again to all of us, if you answer Yesh Rabbi b'chol koichai, either Rashi says b'chol kavanasai, or Toi says b'kol ram, korin like gzar dinai, and according to the Rif, Rosh, and Tur, the Girs is gzar dinai shel shivim shana. So obviously there's much more to the Kaddish than meets the eye, but the truth is in the Kaddish itself, there are different types. There are actually 4 different types of Kaddish that Yidden say. Of course, there's a Chatzi Kaddish that's usually said in between parts of davening. The Kaddish Tiskabel that's said after Shemayin Esra or after Slichos, that's like a Shemayin Esra. The 3rd type of Kaddish is based on the Gemara in Soita Daf Mem Tes, a very powerful, a very meaningful Kaddish that's called Kaddish D'Rabbanan. The Gemara says in Soita that even though after the Churban, one day is worse than the next, Kol Yom Mraba Kolosim Shel Chaveroi. So how does the world exist? Alma Amai Kam Mekayim. And one of the 2 things that the world exists on is the Kaddish after learning. It needs a hezbollah why in some shuls they don't do that after learning. There's nothing to do with Kaddish Yasom. Even a non-Yasom could say it. But that's the 3rd type of Kaddish, is the Kaddish D'Rabbanan. And then the sugya for today is the Kaddish Yasom, which also we say very often in the end of every davening, Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, and again in Shachris we say it a number of times. Either it's Mincha, Ma'ariv, we say it also. But what's interesting, even though there are many different shilas, but I think we could answer all the shilas, our derech is with really one important yisod that we have to be magdim. The Kaddish as it is, says the Chayodam in the beginning of Chlal Lamed, was a takanas of Anshe Knesset G'doila. After the Churban, obviously there was lacking a lot of Kvod Shamayim, so they had to replenish and they had to replace the Kvod Shamayim, and that's the minhag of saying Kaddish B'chlal. He's talking about the regular Kaddish. He puts it to the times of the Anshe Knesset G'doila after the first Churban Abayis. The Aruch HaShulchan Mamish spells it out. It was the Anshe Knesset G'doila Masakin it after Churban Bayis Rishon. Now, since as the Chayyim spells out, it's based on the posuk v'nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. It's very reasonable to say that Kaddish, the saying of Kaddish, is a deraisa. It's really interesting because if you hold tefillah as the Rabbanon, so then Kaddish is more than tefillah. Because Kaddish, based on the pasuk v'nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael, it's the mitzvah, the deraisa of Kiddush Shem Shemayim that's done b'Rabbim. So it's possible that Kaddish is a deraisa. The Mishnah in Kuf Chaf Hey Siv Cotton Daled, and in the Sefer Teres Habayis Elul Mabarichas, he writes beferish that when a person either says or answers the Kaddish, he's mekayim the mitzvah deraisa of the nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. In fact, if you look in the Sid the Yavitz, he says when a person answers or says Kaddish, he should say hinei muchan and mezuman, of course, when shaykh, but he should at least have in mind that he's been mekayim a deraisa of Kiddush Shem Shemayim. In fact, the Mishnah in two places, in Kuf Tes Sif Cotton Daled and Kuf Chaf Hey Sif Cotton Ches, Mishnah spells out mefurish that answering Kaddish is more chashiv than answering Kedusha, which many people don't know. I mean, Kedusha, we give it special importance, but Kaddish is even more important. I wonder, they're both Kiddush Shem Shemayim, why is Kaddish more than Kedusha? So it could be like we said, because since Yehesh Mraba has such a power to it, it elicits such a response by the Rebbeinu Shalom. Maybe that's why Kaddish is even more than Kedusha. But be that as it may, this is an introduction to the general concept of Kaddish. What's important today is the Kaddish Yasom has a different source. And that's based on a kolboy in Siman Kuf Yudalit. It's also in Zarua, in Hilchos Shabbos Siman Nun. It's quoted from a number of sources, Tanchuma, or the Sifri, and the Goyin already says we don't have these midrashos. But we want to see it inside. It's the Zarua and Hilchos Shabbos Siman Nun. And he tells a story about Rabbi Akiva, the Heilige Tana Rabbi Akiva. He once met someone that looked like he was in terrible shape. I mean, I'm just being mekatza, but ayin sham barichas. And he goes, what's the matter? So he says, he's a mace, and because there was a terrible balavera, he has a gefer lecha, einish of Gehenim. So Rabbi Akiva said, can I help you in any way? He goes, not really. Because he left over a son, and if the son would say Kaddish, that would save his neshama, but who knows what happened to his son. He said he was a Rosh, his wife was a Rishanta, he left the son, it wasn't even Gemalt, so it's basically no hope. But Rabbi Akiva, being the Groisa, person that he was, he set on a mission to find a child, and it's interesting, Barichas, he came to a city, Lutkia, and he asked about the person that he met. He said, oh, Shem Rishayim Yirkab, don't even talk about him. Does he have a wife? Oh, she's a Rishanta. Does he have a son? No, you don't know about that son. He wasn't even Gemalt. But Rabbi Akiva didn't give up. And he found the son, and a whole story, but he took him and he taught him how to say Kaddish and Baruch Hu. And at that point, the nifta, that Rasha, came to him and told him, thank you so much, Tanuach Daitcha, Sheitzalti Oise Midina Shel Gehenim. So Rabbi Akiva's golden, sterling midas saved this person from Gehenim. Zokta Zarua, I also found in one of the Rishonim that when a child says a cotton that says Kaddish, Matzul Aviv Min HaParanis. Please note that word cotton, the Kaddish, saves the father from Paranios. Now this is the source of the mitzvah, the inyan of saying Kaddish. And again, you see the Avas Yisrael of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a masmid otzum. The Gemara says in Pesachim Kuf Tes, he never stopped learning, and his learning was to the extent that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara says in Menachos Chaf Tes, Moshe Rabbeinu saw Rabbi Akiva, goes, if you have him, do you need me? Rabbi Akiva had the biggest yeshiva in history, 24,000 Talmidim. Where did he have time to go and find this person's son? But that was his godless. But be that as it may, we see the extraordinary power of Kaddish, that it's able to extricate a person from Gehenim. But there's more to it. And this is quoted with Shem Darizal, that not only it takes the person neshama out of Gehenim, but it adds chusim to put him into Gan Eden. And the emphasis, when you look at the Zoya, the Lashon of the Zoya, about the Kaddish, the great schar, and the effect that Kaddish has, Lashon HaKadosh is it Schorei Gadol v'Noira she'oisa b'chol hatzdadim she'oila b'chol hatzdadim l'mayla v'sheveres min oilam v'chaisamois shel barzel. It's an incredible koyach that the Kaddish has to do wonders for the neshama. And the emphasis, we saw what the Kaddish does, the Yeshua Rabbah. It's not a surprise. It has this awesome power. So basically, the Kaddish is based on a story of Rabbi Akiva. The Maral's brother in Sefer Chaim Pei Ches says it is a makar in the Torah for Kaddish, because Bilam said, Tamos Nafshi Mois Yesharim. Yesharim is Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach. So Kaddish Yasom has a very prominent source. How does Kaddish work for a different neshama? How does the son's Kaddish help for the father? So that's the old Yesod in Gemara Sanhedrin Kuf Dalid, Bra Mezaka Abba. A son has the koyach to do something for the father's neshama. And that's why it's interesting in Ramah and Shin Ayin Vav Siv Dalid, the Ramah says that we find in a medrash, he's referring to these medrashos, that a son should say Kaddish for the father or mother, even though in the story of Rabbi Akiva it was about a father, but there's no difference, father and mother. And the Ramah says you say Kaddish for 12 months, and also says the son should say get the maftir, which some have that minhag. So basically, it's in Kaddish is a deraisa of Kiddushem Shamayim, which a son uses for a parent to bring him out of Gehenna and bring him into Gan Eden. Now that we have a better understanding of the Kaddish, let's apply this Lamaisa. So first of all, Kaddish has two important components. Number one, Kiddushem Shamayim, but now we also see it's also a form of kibbutz. Don't forget, if a person gives his father something to eat, he's Mekayim mitzvah deraisa of kibbutz. So if a person gives his father what he needs most, chusim, that's certainly a deraisa. I'll say, but if the father passed away, is there kibbutz? The answer is absolutely. Because the Gemara's lashon in Kedushin is mechabdoi b'chayoy, b'chayav mechabdoi b'moisoi. It says the different Malkiel and Chelik Beis, Kufla Medzayin, and the Pelayoyitz and Erech kibbutz, that from the Gemara that equates mechabdoi b'chayav and b'moisoi, it seems that kibbutz when the father's alive or when the father passes away is the same mitzvah, the raisa of kibbutz. And the truth is it's a svara. If it helps for the father, so who cares if the father's alive or not? So that's why it's reasonable to say a son that says Kaddish for a parent is Mekayim two deraisas. The actual Kaddish in itself is deraisa, and also it's a fulfillment of kibbutz. I saw this in a fascinating tshuva in the Yad Eliyot of Regula in Siman Samach Vav. He has a tragic story there where a person fell into a lake and they never recovered his body. So obviously his wife could not remarry until they found the body. But his wife was concerned, and she said, at least let the children say Kaddish for their father. So Rabbi Regula paskind that Kaddish is oim the merumish shaloilam, and every mace needs it, and it's a kibbutz of deraisa. It's bigger than mechabda b'chayoy. And he says, even though the wife cannot remarry until there's sufficient proof, but the son should say Kaddish. So, but it says b'ferish, it's bigger than kibbutz of b'chayoy. I saw another fascinating tshuva who really expands the concept of Kaddish. The Maramshik in Archaim Siman Chavav was asked an interesting question. Someone had a very sick sister, and he was davening for her recovery. He didn't know the sister had passed away. And people that knew that the sister died asked him, Ramshik, should they tell the person that his sister died? You're wondering, why not? Because the Shulchan Aruch, in Yeridei, at the end of Siman Tov Beis, are based on a pasuk in Mishlei, Moitzei Diba Huksil. It's not proper to say bad news. So if you tell the person his sister died, you're telling him bad news. So Mamshik has an incredible tshuva. He says, don't tell the person that his sister died. He's davening for her sister. No, it'll be a schus for neshama. Frag the Mamshik on himself. The Shulchan Aruch in Tov Beis paskins that if a person died, you have to tell the children that the father died so he could say Kaddish. So he says, yeah, that's different. Because when a son says Kaddish to the father, there are two chiyuvim to say Kaddish. He says the mitzvah Shabbos Aveda and the mitzvah Samer al Dam Riecha, which is interesting. I mean, the person passed away already, but he's assuming it's included in Samer al Dam Riecha and Shabbos Aveda. But on the sister, there's no Kaddish. So here we see more reason to give chashivas to Kaddish. It's Samer al Dam Riecha and possibly also the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. But be that as it may, I think what's most important is that Kiddush Shem Shemayim, it certainly is, and Kibbutz. But what's certainly important to mention is this is the real Kibbutz. You know, I saw this story, this is printed, that the Alta von Slobodka, after his Petira, came in a dream to his son, Rabbi Lezer Yudelfinkel, the original Rosh Yeshiva of Mir, and he said, who was his son, and said, Lezer Yehuda, Shikme Peklach. Now, this story is quoted often because here we see that a mace is aware of what the son is doing. And the mace, the Alta von Slobodka, asked his son to shik Peklach. Of course, Peklach means chusim. But to me, what's amazing, if there was any Marbitz Torah that was successful, it was the Alta von Slobodka. A partial list of his Talmidim, I certainly can't say all of them, but a partial list of the Alta von Slobodka's Talmidim, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Reuven Gazovsky, Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky, Rav Ruderman, Rav Hutner, Rav Shach, Rav Meir Chodesh, Rav Vigdor Miller, and more. So you would think a person like that has plenty of schusim, which he did have. But obviously there's no end to schusim for the neshama. And this is an important concept for a child to hear, no matter how chashuv the father was, but the son's main kibbutz now is shik peklach. And every kaddish and every schus counts. In the Or Yecheskel, the letters of Rabbi Chaskel Levenstein, Michtav Reish Lamed Vav, I think Rabbi Chaskel had a shaykhus to these things. He says that if a person says kaddish without the right kavanah, the neshama has a taina. Like I saw once, I don't know how he saw, maybe he heard it, but a Gilgal came back and said, today's Kaddish wasn't good. So the mace knows if the Kaddish is good or not. So obviously every Kaddish has meaning. And that's the truth, that Kaddish, each one, although it's 11 months and there are a number of Kaddishim every day, but each one has to count. And Eitz Tova Kamash, I would mention, it's the oldest question, why we say Kaddish in Aramaic and Aramis. It would be more appropriate, Lashon HaKodesh, that we understand. So the simple teretz is, because the Malachim are envious, are jealous of our Kaddish. Look, what we could say a Kaddish. So we don't want them to understand what we're saying, so we say it in Aramaic. But the more simple teretz is that in those days, that was the language, Aramaic. So you wanted a person to understand what he's saying, so they institute Kaddish in Aramaic. Now, that was a ma'ila then, but it's a chesaron today, because we don't understand Aramaic. And that's why it's a wonderful idea, it's a wonderful investment, a once-time investment for someone that's either saying Kaddish or answering Kaddish, to get to all of us. Learn the meaning of the words. It's not so hard. There are Chashochan and Siman and Vav explains. I saw the Gesher Chaim and Perik Lam and Si Vav. The Tzitz Eliezer, Yudalad. Many poskim took the time to go through every word of the Kaddish to understand what we're saying. Because if you don't know what you're saying, it becomes just a chant. So if you know what the meaning of the words, the sayer and the responder says it with more kavanah. I saw this story printed in the Sefer Halichas Vanagas of the Kilas Yankov. A young man was nifta very young, and he left over children at a very young age. And the oldest was still very young, and he didn't want to say Kaddish. So they came to the disciple, what should we do? So the disciple says, I really don't have too much experience, but bring the child to me, let me see if I can try to help. And I guess the key word is, with great chamimus, with varmkeit, the disciple spoke to the child and said, listen, your father's in Olam HaEmes, and by him, all the money and all the gold is worth nothing, but one thing is valuable, your Kaddish. And he's waiting anxiously for your Kaddish, and I'll tell you a story. And he told him the story of Rabbi Akiva with the child that said Kaddish and saved his father. And then he said, and now it's up to you, say the Kaddish, it's the greatest favor you could do for your father. And as you could imagine, for the next 11 months, the child said Kaddish diligently. So I was thinking, sometimes adults like us also have to hear this from the stipler, what a Kaddish is, how important it is for the neshama, what Shikin Peklach is all about. But basically, the Kaddish is a chesed shel emes for the parent that is incomparable. Nothing else a son could do compares to the Kaddish, except, of course, other schusim, as you could imagine. But basically, this is the chesed of all chasadim of Kibbutz Av. Now, I want to make a point, because some people make a mistake here. I saw this in the tzavah of the Yad Eliyahu. I mentioned earlier, in the beginning of the Sefer, here's that tzavah, and he writes that Chas v'shalom, he writes to his children, Chas v'shalom to think that you're saying Kaddish for me. He says, don't say Kaddish for my neshama. You're saying Kaddish to bring Kvod Shemayim, Kaddish Shem Shemayim. Granted, it's a schus for the nifta. But he says, Chas v'shalom achsheves pigol, to think you're saying Kaddish for the father. And I saw this also in the Siddur Yavitz and also the Gesher Chaim and Amud Shin Tezayin, that you're not saying Kaddish for the father. You look at the Kaddish, nothing to do about the father. Now I did see Grada in the Sefer, the Sefer on Siddur, Oylas Talmud of Shmuel Hamana, a Talmud of the Chavetz Chaim. He also says, you don't say Kaddish for the neshama, but if you want, you could add it into two places. When you say Al Kol Yisrael, or when you say Ois Shalom Bimraimav, then you could have the father or mother in mind. But the gist, the thrust of the Kaddish is not for the father, it's for the Kvod Shemayim. Grada, when the son does this Gevaldik Kiddush Shem Shemayim, the schus goes for the father. In fact, I even once saw that poskim say that when a person is saying Kaddish for a non-relative, a non-father or mother, or he's saying it for an aunt, or whatever it is, then you both say the Kaddish is l'schus Ploini ben Ploini. Now, is that a steer to what we said? No. You're saying Kaddish, the Kvod Shemayim. Who does schus go to? Then the schus can be directed in any direction. Now, another question that I wanted to clarify, how many times minimum should the Kaddish be said? In other words, there are many times we say it in Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv a few times. So sometimes a person finds it hard to catch a minyan. He's out of town, he's on vacation, on business, or stam during the winter, he can't find a minyan. How important is it to find that minyan, say Kaddish every single time? And the answer, which is an answer to many of our questions, is if we would understand how important the Kaddish is, we would find the ability to say every Kaddish that's possible. Don't forget, it's the most vital, crucial Kibbutz Av Achamisa. So it's worth the extra miles or the extra distance. Every Kaddish counts. The Aruch HaShulchan cautions, and this is important to mention as well. In Nun Hey Gimel, it says some people say extra Kaddish just to chaperein. So that's not necessarily correct. Aruch HaShulchan speaks about the issur to Marbeh b'Kadishim. I've seen this more than once. Someone comes late to shul, and he wants to say Kaddish. So all of a sudden he says Kaddish. I once saw one of the poskim writes, that's a Kaddish Yasom. The Kaddish is a Yasom, not the person. There's no shaykh to anything. It's like a man Yasom. So stam to be Marbeh b'Kadishim, says the Aruch HaShulchan, that's the violation of Tishtapechna Avnei Kodesh B'Roish Kol Chutzos. It's a play on words, the pasuk in Eicha, but it has to have meaning. But every Kaddish that you're allowed to say should be said. Stam to Chap Kadeshim is inappropriate. If someone davens a 1 minyan, so saying Kaddish in a second minyan has no pshat. But the Kaddish that has to be said, try not to miss even one. I saw the Rav Pa'olim, that's the Ben Ish Chai in his Tshuva Sefer in Chelik Bey, Siman Yudalid. We'll soon see, he's talking about saying Kaddish during Sukkah de Zimra, the question of Hefsik, but his Lashon is vital. Eitzel ha'olam, I'll just read it in English. It's someone that misses even one Kaddish is considered mezalzel b'chvoid hanifta, because every Kaddish counts, is a tzorach gadol for the nifta, and it's a chayiv on the Yisomim to say every Kaddish that's shaykh and not to miss even one. So basically, a person should try to say every Kaddish. Now, if someone is an oynis rachmana patre. If someone has to go on a business deal and there's no other minyanim, so maybe you could say, since Kaddish is Kibbutz Av, and the mitzvah Kibbutz Av is Mishel HaAv, the son doesn't have to lose money for it, maybe it could be Mekel. but a person has to use seichel and a little bit avas of a ve'imai and try not to miss even one Kaddish. Someone asked me, he wants to go on vacation and he'll miss Kaddish. So I told him, you have to know B'chlal, if you go on vacation, you miss Tefillah B'tzibas, it's so pashut. I mean, you might say, well, when I leave, I already daven Ma'ariv. The next morning, I wake up, my vacation site, there's no minyan, I'm an Einus. But then the question is, so who asked you to go there? So I want to tell you what I saw, 2 tshuvas of Shevet HaLevi, Chelik Vav, Siman Chaf Aleph. Someone asked me this question. He was a lamdin, and he says, I go to vacation, and I'm there, I'm an Einus, I'm potter. So he basically says, who said you're allowed to go to places, no minyan? You'll say, you write to me, he says, tzaddikim did this. So he says, must be tzaddikim had a reason, that maybe they needed it for their health. And if they had no reason, maybe they're not tzaddikim. And then a second tshuva, chelik ches siman samach vav, this is really what he calls a mikra oyem, a frightening incident. Someone asked him, he went on vacation, and there was no minyan. I don't know how it happened, but it confused the days. So he thought Friday was really Shabbos, and his entire family, Erloch from a Yidden, were mechalal the entire Shabbos, thinking it's Friday. And they kept Shabbos on Sunday. So they asked Rav Osner what to do. So he wrote back, what do you mean what to do? You mechalal Shabbos a whole Shabbos. And by the way, had you only gone to a place that there was a minyan, this wouldn't have happened. He added that, sort of agav, but it's powerful. So Bekitza, the Bechlal going away to a place with no minyan is not pashit, but especially when it involves kibbut of. Now again, if someone needs it for his health, emotional or physical health, there might be a heter. But even then, when a person has a heter to miss Kaddish, we have to remember what the Magen Avram writes in Kuf Lamed Beis. I'm going to write when a person cannot say Kaddish, let him hire someone to say Kaddish in his place. Zok the Machzor Shekel, why hire someone? A Yid will do it for free. So he says, yeah, but a doctor that doesn't get paid for his job won't do a good job. It's Gemara Lashon. Also, for it to be a schus for the son, let him pay. Rav Sternbach in a tshuva in Chele Gimel adds another svara, and he says that basically, if Pliny says Kaddish for someone else's father, how does it work? What kind of schus is it? It's not Brahma Zaka Abba. But if the son pays for the Kaddish, then we could say Brahma Zaka Abba. So whenever a person does miss saying Kaddish, he should hire someone. The Machzor Shekel is on the page in Kuf Lamed Beis. The Tshuvas Hanagas is Gimel Nun Gimel. He should hire someone that makes it his chus. An interesting question is, someone asked me, but why should I pay my own money for Kaddish? It's kibbut of Mishel Ha'ov. So I told you, making a mistake. You could stay home and say Kaddish for free. He wants to go away and not pay someone. That's not Mishel Ha'ov. It's like Reb Chaim's famous story. Someone said he can't go visit his father because his father lives in a different city and he has to pay for the train. Kafir. Kibbut of Mishel Ha'ov. So Reb Chaim says, so walk. Take you a month? Who cares? Walk. Oh, you want to go by train for your convenience? That's not Mishel Ha'ov. Here also this would probably apply. The next group of questions we'll call part 2 is when not to say Kaddish. So obviously that's usually not the case, but I could say one case that's extremely negeya. If the Kaddish will cause machlokes, then better not say Kaddish. Now Baruch Hashem, in our times, Kaddish is not the source of machlokes. The Ahmed and Elias is, but it used to be a time that only one person said Kaddish at a time. Even though there was a few available, they would switch off. And then it was common that the Kaddish caused machlokes. So I saw the Gesher Chaim in Perik Lamed, Yud Gimel says, a roh choili, a terrible sickness that people fight about the Kaddish. He says the whole Kaddish is Kvoit Shemayim. And the biggest zilzul in Kvoit Shemayim is machlokes. So how could you fight for a Kaddish? The Yad Alayo in his Savo also says if Kaddish brings machlokes, don't say Kaddish. Now, the problem is the Nesoyin here is very great. Because when it comes to anything he's doing for his father, whether it's Kaddish, Aliyah, Amid, a person says, it's not my cover. My cover, I'm Moichel. But my father's covered, I can't be Moichel. My father, I can't be Moichel, is covered. So the answer is, it's not your father's covered either if it causes machlokes. And I once thought, I found Taka the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, in Chav Vav Yud Ches says this pshat. It's a plea. When you learn Shulchan Aruch, you see many halachas are based on the fact that only one Kaddish is said at a time. If there are even a few brothers saying the same on the same father, one Kaddish at a time. The Halacha devotes the first Halacha Siman Kuf Lamed Beis about how to divide Kadeshim. And today you rarely see this minhag, if ever. What happened? So I was thinking maybe the pshat is pashut, because dividing Kaddish causes machlaikis, and oy bazoi, halacha is ignored to prevent machlaikis. The Kitzur says that's why the minhag was stopped. And we all say Kaddish together to avoid machlaikis. I once saw this very clever story. Michael Yudah Lefkowitz, Zechayim Levracha, once went to a Beis Ovel. Someone that was nifty young, and the children came and said, we want to do something special for our father. He was nifty young. What great schus could the Rashivas recommend that we do? So he said on the spot, be makabel now for the next 11 months, not to fight for anything for the father's covet. Not for an aliyah, not for an amid, just don't fight. If you keep shalom, that's a great schus. So that's someone that's thinking, Tayridik. Someone once asked me, he was beyond his mother's 50th yartzeit. Do you say Kaddish beyond 50 years? So the question is a lot to understand. Well, why not? It's still the same mother. So I looked into this, and the tshuva of the Minchas Halacha, it's not in the Minchas Halacha, but I saw it printed in the Tzitz Eliezer Yudalet Ayin Hey. He says, Nishtoimamti, I was shocked by the question, and he says, if anything is a makar tamei for this minhag, that's what he writes. Because the goyim, lahavdil, after a person's buried 50 years, they feel that he's gone. There's nothing about him that remains. And they dig up the body and they reuse the plot. But that's by a goyim that have no neshama. But for a yid, it's unthinkable, such a minhag. After 50 years, no different than before 50 years. The Rav Pa'olim, in the end of Chelik Dal, Tzod Yisharim, Siman Yud Zayin, someone asked him, maybe after 20 years, there's no longer a yartzeit. Says the Rav Pa'olim, that's the Ben Ish Chai, even 100 years after the yartzeit, the first yartzeit, you keep the yartzeit. So basically, if you understand that there's nitzchias and a neshama, yartzeit is also lenetzach, as much as a person could do. Now, then I found something. Rav Moshe has a very important, a very big tshuva in Yardei Chelik Dal Siman Samach Aleph. Many questions about yartzeit and about Kaddish. So I try to read the whole tshuva to see what's doing there. But he has one sif cut in Yud Dalet. He has a fascinating shaila. Someone in the yeshiva, this was got a minhag, it was very common in the old days. Today you don't see it as much, but in the olden days, the 1900s, the early 1900s, and many people in Nebuch were not from. Someone died, and there was no from relatives, so they hired a yeshiva to get someone to say Kaddish. So the shaila was, the yeshiva had someone that in 1930, someone paid money, the yeshiva to say Kaddish. How long does the Kaddish go for? Tarvadas is 102 years old. Someone that paid 1921 for Kaddish, how long does it go for? So Moshe says if they paid and they didn't make it how many years, then maximum is 50 years. Why? La'olam sometimes mean 50 years, like we find by Yovel. So regarding Choshe Mishpat, I could understand that makes sense. So again, someone paid Tarvadas 1922 to say Kaddish his father. So 100 years later, he's still saying Kaddish. I mean, it's unreasonable. So what's the cutoff point? So Moshe speculates 50 years. No. That's regarding a mamanish shayla, but Kaddish itself is la'olam. Question: if a Aval wanted to know, could he say Kaddish when he's in the middle of Psuka de Zimra? So I was malam b'tzchus that he probably wants to get a head start and start up Psuka de Zimra early. But he admitted, no, he was very late, and he's holding Psuka de Zimra, and they're holding by Aleinu. So the emes is regarding saying Asher Yotza during Psuka de Zimra, the famous machlokes a poskim, maybe it's a hefsek, maybe you shouldn't say it, but it makes sense that if the only time we could say Kaddish is now, so he has a mitzvah deraisa of Kiddush Shem Shemayim and a mitzvah of Kibbutz. And the original Rav poem that I mentioned earlier in Chelik Beis Yudal says beferish you're allowed to say Kaddish during Psuka de Zimra. It's not a hefsek for this very reason. Also the Marshag and Archaim Memches and the Spink and Arches Chaim Nun Aleph Gimel also says it's mutter to say Kaddish during Psuka de Zimra. I must say the Levushay Mordechai in Tinyana Simul Amavav is Machmir. He calls it a hefsek, But I think enough poskim say that if there's no other choice, the aval or anybody could say Kaddish during Psuka de Zimra. But the emphasis is I can't go without making a point that for an aval to come late to davening is inappropriate. I once said maybe the schus that the aval has is besides the Kaddish, at least he's on time for davening every day because he has to get the Amid. But to come late for davening is something that's really inappropriate. And be'emes, what he should do is daven, like find a different minyan and daven regularly and say Kaddish in its place. A parent left a tzava not to say Kaddish for them. So it sounds strange and reckless, and Ataka is. I mean, don't forget, we're talking about the Altavas Labotka said the Shik Pekluch, and his minhag was to say Kaddish for 12 months, and the father thinks he doesn't need the Kaddish. But you have to realize, and this I saw in the Chelkas Yaakov Yodei Siman Reish Lamed Aleph, there was a different world in the early 1900s, and the parents were Yirei and V'Shleim, and the children weren't. So he has a shayla there where the father left the tzavah, Ich befrei dich von sagen Kaddish. I relieve you of the duties. Sagt der Chelkas Yaakov, you hear the way he's talking, he's pashit, scared to impose on his son. But he says the son should now listen, and the son should say Kaddish. And he says, especially if the son is Yena's son, who's not so frum, the only thing that's connecting him to Yiddishkeit is he has to say Kaddish. It's Yedua, even those that were not so frum, but they said Kaddish. And he said a word that I guess in those days was common, Tfilais avos tiknum. Many children's davening was only because of the fathers, because they had to say Kaddish, an upright Jew, even if you're not from, but you say Kaddish for the 11 months. So if the father will moichel the son on that, so the son's really of Gehakt Tzaris. So he basically says the father desperately needs it, and the son should not listen to the father. I saw an interesting shayla, the Shalom Eshiv in Gimel Aleph Reish Nun Tes. Someone told who his son became a chassid, and his son said Kaddish v'yasamach b'konei, and the father didn't like that. And he said so his son should not say Kaddish. He didn't want the Kaddish for him. That's v'yasam b'konei. So the Shalom Eshiv said, you know what? Let the son say Kaddish, but skip v'yasamach b'konei. But you can't skip Kaddish. That's something that's too invaluable to skip. If a son's a rasha, Rachmana litzlan, and the father doesn't want his son to say Kaddish. So that I saw the Pri Asada in Chelik Beis Nun Gimel. If he feels his son's Kaddish is damaging, no, maybe he doesn't want it. But even that, you have to remember that word that the Chelkas Yaakov said, Ava is tiknum. This might connect the son back to his father's roots. So it's not kedai. You could understand that it's really something that keeps that connection going, or maybe creates that connection. What's interesting, there's a whole tumult in the poskim if the mother is nifta and the father, tells his son, don't say Kaddish for the mama. Not because he's in a machlaikis, but he's worried because he's alive and his son's saying Kaddish. People have this fear that Kaddish is something, it's about them. Say like an Al-Tiftach Pel Satan, about some type of Ayin Hara. So the Ramah makes a point in Reish Ayin Vav Siv Dal, where that's the halachas of Kaddish Yasom, that the son should say the Kaddish, even though the father objects, because there's nothing wrong, it's not dangerous. And Zok the Am Shel Shloim Kedushin Aleph Samach Gimel, what's pshat in this psak? Because the Maisa of Rabbi Kiva shows the importance of Kaddish, and how could the son not say Kaddish for his mother? Because the father's unfounded concern. So it's like Lavel Divrei Torah. Even though the father has no bad kavanah, it's not because they're machlaikis. And he says the son is mechuyev al after kamoicha to say Kaddish, even though his father objected. You might say the father's alive and he's having agmas nefesh. Terry says tell the father, don't worry. But what's noteworthy, the Magen Avram and Kuf Lamed Beis Sivkot and Beis quotes a rivash that says in this case the son should not say Kaddish because the father's being hurt. But from Magen Avram's Maskana, he quotes the Ramah. It seems that all agree, Halacha l'maisa, even if the father objects, the son must say Kaddish for the mother. And again, the son should do with sensitivity and explain to the father, nothing will happen, it's not a chashash, this is minhag ha'olam to say Kaddish. What to me was a tremendous chiddush, and I still can't fully understand it, but when does the son stop saying Kaddish Yasom for the departed parent? So we would say 12 months. That's when the yartzeit is observed. But the pliya is, the Ramah and Shinai Vav Siv Dalet quotes Binyamin Ze'ev, Kuf Samach Aleph, that the minhag is, Nahagu, that the son only says Kaddish for 11 months. The Maril in Simon Chav Beis in the Tshuva says that Bekitza, but the actual source is this Binyamin Ze'ev, one of the earliest Achrayim. And the truth is, it's very hard to understand why that is so. Because everything about Avelis is for 12 months. There's Avelis, the yartzeit, and also the reason what the Ramah gives is Kadish la yasu aviyam ve'imam rishayim ki mishpatei rishayim b'shnei masa chaydish. To the good person, it's 11 months, but for the Rasha, it's 12 months. So by saying Kaddish for 12 months, he is implying that his father or mother is a Rasha. So the emes is very nice to be optimistic, and your parents are wonderful, but if we see Tzadiki Olam said to say Kaddish for them for 12 months, we'll soon see Gedoyli Olam insisted Kaddish for 12 months. Who could say his parents don't need it? And B'chlal, the minhag is that Kaddish is said for 12 months, we said in the Rizal, it's also a schus to bring the Gan Eden. So doesn't that apply? And the emes is the Taz in Yeridei Reish Mem, Sif Cotton Yud Beis, regarding saying Hareini Kaparas Mishkavai, wonders that the minhag is you say Hareini Kaparas Mishkavai for 12 months. What about Merzi Karasha? So the Taz is Alam B'Sheteretz. He's saying it, Hareini Kaparas Mishkavai, if they have Averis. But maybe they don't, so maybe it's Anigeya. But Kaddish is more as pronouncing his parents are Rishayim. Lamaisa, you should know the Shulchan Aruch, and that's the minhag of Svardim, make no mention of 11 months, and that's why the Chidah in Shurei Bracha, the Rav Pa'olim in Gimel Lamed Beis, and Be'emes in Shara Kavanas of the Riyah Kaddish is Mefurish, that the Rizal said to say Kaddish for 12 months for a father or mother. And that's the minhag of Svardim, and even some Gedolei Ashkenaz. I should mention in the Beis Yitzchak, Levavirov, and the Chuvas, Yeridei Chelik Beis Kuflin Zayin, he brings a pliyadika tzava of Rab Shlomo Kluga that his children should say Kaddish for 13 months. And Shlomo Kluga was the Gadol Hador, and they asked the Beis Yitzchak, Levavirov, could we listen to his tzava? Like we're embarrassing him for 13 months. The average person is 11 months, and he not 12, 13. So he says, 12 months you could say, the last month let the son daven for the Yomtov and only say the Kaddish in davening. But, you know, if the Shlomo Kluga, who wrote an amazing amount of Svarim, was worried about his neshama the 13th month, so how do we just say 11 months? Rab Chatzkel said the minhag in Kelm, that's what he told his Einiklach when his son-in-law, Rabbi Chaim Mordechai Ginsburg is Nifta Young, that the minhag was to say Kaddish for 12 months. The Yad Eliyod, the Regula Rav, begged his children to say Kaddish for the last month as well. It seems that Lamaisa, that's the minhag of Svardim and some Ashkenazim. But I want to tell you an interesting tshuva that I saw, because I was a little confused. It makes sense to say for 12 months. Well, you know, why not? Someone asked the Shevet HaLevi, Chele Gimel Kuf Samachei, he said he knew his mother's mindset, and his mother certainly would have wanted that he should say Kaddish for 12 months. Not like the minhag Ashkenaz, because she was a fruma. But she didn't say anything. Should he say 12 months Kaddish? So Rav Osler responded, Chalila, to say Kaddish 12 months. Because we have our Amaz minhag, and we follow minhagim. Your mother, if she had asked the Farish, you have to listen. But she didn't. You follow minhag Yisrael, and you're okay. You want to have schusim? Good. Learn a lot, and daven good, and give tzedakah. Reminds what Rapam once said. He was a young 12-year-old boy, and his parents sent him to yeshiva, to Slabotka, to learn, and he was very homesick. Occasionally, he got regards from the Balagol, who came from his shtetl to Slabotka, and he got regards from his parents, and a mamash was like very relieving. When his parents had more notice, they would write him a letter and send him a letter, and that was really relieving. But he said when his parents had more advanced notice, so his mother would send him a heisa kugel, and he said then, when I got the heisa kugel from my mother, it was like a Yomtov. I don't think the kugel was still heis when he got it, but it was like mamish, like great, wonderful. So he said when he got older, he realized there was a message in that. Because when he got older, he realized when his parents passed away, now he has to send his parents a pekel. Listen to what he said. He says, when I said Kaddish for my parent, it was like sending regards. When I learned Torah, it was like sending a letter. But when I learned Torah, I was machzik Torah, and I gave tzedakah for Torah, that was sending a heisa kugel. So obviously, Kaddish is great, but learning Torah and giving tzedakah and achzakas Torah is the heisa kugel. So when a parent doesn't say anything, the minhag of Ashkenazim is 11 months. The 12th month, he should be Marbeh and Torah and tzedakah and chesed, and that's the heisa kugel. The Ber Heitev points out that when someone does say 11 months, it should be 11 full months. Lamashal, if the parent passed away Tezvav Elul, so the son says Kaddish until Yudalid Av Va'ad B'chlal, until the mincha of Yudalid Av, which makes it a full 11 months. Also, some have a minhag that on the day of, it's called Yom Hafsaka, when he stops saying Kaddish, he gets an aliyah if possible. The Halacha says, in those days when they used to divide the Kaddisim, but the Yom Hafsaka, the son had all the Kaddisim. So it was something special about the Yom Hafsaka. The Pischei Tshuva and Shin Ayin Vav Sif Cotton Test says if a person knows that his parent was a Rasha, he should say Kaddish 12 months. I guess there's no question of Mechzik Rasha because it's well known, but that's an exceptional case. Of course, it's Pashit without mentioning it, but when you have it a leap year, 13 months, there's still Kaddish. There's 11 months, nothing to do with a leap year, it's to do with 11 months. The Gesha Chaim and Lamed Tes, Sivkot and Dal, and the Igros Moshe, and that Tshuva, Sivkot and Tezvav, says that let's say a person, for whatever reason, can't say Kaddish, and he hires someone to say Kaddish for his parent, then the person should say Kaddish for 12 months. Because no Mechzik Rishayim if it's not his parent. Which to me was a big chiddush, and I found Rav Voslan Chayla Gimel Kuf Samachay, and more emphatically the Badi HaShulchan and Sivkot and Kuf Chaf Aleph say it's the same Mechzik Rasha. You're paying someone to say Kaddish 12 months for your parent. It's the same Mechzik Rishayim. So that psak is not as clear. But one thing I will say, and this laida sometimes happens, a person saying Kaddish for his father, and Nebuch, his mother, passed away Toich 11 months. So now, when he finished 11 months for his father, should he stop saying Kaddish? But his mother needs it, but his father's Mechzik Rishayim. So that's Pashit. Taki the Badi HaShulchan, if caught in your test, says it's Pashit. That's not a problem. So if caught in Kuf your test, that is, because it's not Mercy that is making his father Russia, because it's obviously saying Kaddish for his mother's Neshama. Also, I saw the poskim say, the Badi HaShulchan points out also, that it's Pashit that if Lamaisa, the son stops saying Kaddish after 11 months, but when he learns and he finishes learning, he still can say Kaddish, the Rabbanan. Because the Kaddish Rabbanan after learning is really nothing to do with Kaddish Yasom. Even a non-Nas Yasom could say it. So the Badi Shulchan points that out, that Lamaisa, that Kaddish has nothing to do with the Kaddish Yasom, and really even after 12 months, if he wants to, he could say that Kaddish after learning. The Gesha Chaim and Amid Shin, Yud Zayin, he writes, it's almost depressing, he says, Matziva, the fact that many places they don't say Kaddish after learning. Baruch Hashem, here we do say Kaddish, but it's Medina Gemara, that's what keeps the world existing. A fascinating question is, when do you start counting the 11 months, or 12 months, whatever it is, for the ending of the Kaddish? Is it from the Yom HaKfura, or from the Yom of the Petira? Now, hopefully it's the same day, but sometimes it's a day, 2, 3, or even 4 days in between. My Shver Zechayna Levracha lived a Thursday afternoon, and because he was a Rashiva, they couldn't make Levaya Thursday right away, they had to make it Friday, but he was buried in Eretz Yisrael. Bekitza, he was nifta Thursday, and the crew was Sunday night in Eretz Yisrael. So you're talking about a 4-day difference from the Yom Misa, Thursday afternoon, and the crew was Monday, Sunday night. So when do you stop Kaddish? 11 months from when? Kfura or Yom Misa? So the emphasis is in Svara Zil Basatayma. Because when does the Kaddish start? By the Kfura. When does Gehenim start? Whatever the Dinim start, Yom HaKfura. And that's why it seems the Halacha in Kuf Lamed Beit quotes a Lavush, and there's other sheet, the Pri Megadim and Megiddos Pei Gimel also says this, Yom Hafsaka Nira mi Lavush de Moinim Yom HaKfura. the stopping of Kaddish goes on the Yom HaKfura, not Yom HaMisa. So in this case, you could say Kaddish 4 extra days, not from Misa, from Kfura. This is the psak of the Bialoch. But you know what's puzzling? He continues, the Bialoch continues, but im yesh yamim rabim bein Misa l'Kfura, if there's a few days in between, ein moinin ella miyayim hakfura. What are you adding? You start from Yom HaKfura. If there's a lot of days in between, start from Yom HaKfura. So, frankly, Moshe and Chelik Dalet, Simon Samal, Sivkot and Yutes, there's something missing, something wrong. There's a mistake. You're saying the same thing twice. So Moshe says it must be that not af, even though there's 4 days in between, you go basi Yom HaKfura. In other words, it's always Yom HaKfura, no matter how much days there are in between. Moshe says, even though it's a chiddush that no one corrected this in the chayiv of life, the Chavetz Chaim, his Eidim, Reb Hersh, I mean, it's such an obvious mistake, but it must be a tois atvus. But like you mentioned, Taka, very good, you look in some Mishnah Berurahs, they have the girsa, ein moinim ela miyayim hamisa. But the emes is, in Svara, as we said, it makes sense to start from Yom HaKfura. And I'd like to add, don't forget, there's no issur to start to say extra beyond 11 months. Svardim do it 12 months. Had it been an issur, you have to be careful. But it's not an issur. So once you have a svara that you're doing from Yom HaKfura, and it's not a zilzul in the parent, I think it makes more sense to follow Ramoshe's psak. And if there's a big difference, you always go miyayim HaKfura. The next question, I advise you, urge with caution. This is a true story. I once was davening somebody's mincha, and my first cousin, I know well, he was saying Kaddish. It was Shabbos the afternoon, mincha, he was saying Kaddish. I know my uncle and aunt were alive, and it was like shocking. So I thought maybe he's saying for a shver, but it didn't make sense. So I just didn't know I don't want to say it. I just walked out. But to Shabbos, I got a call that my aunt was nifta Friday night. And then for the first time I realized this interesting question. If someone is nifta on Shabbos, or even Friday, but the Levaya was not yet on Friday, does the Avel say Kaddish on Shabbos? You're wondering, what's the Shaila? We start saying Kaddish from the Kfura. Oh, that's because until the Kfura, the son is an Oinei. He's pater from davening and from tefillin, and certainly pater from Kaddish. But in this scenario, on Shabbos there was the Ptira, and there's no Kfura on Shabbos. I'm sorry, Shabbos was the Ptira, and no Kfura on Shabbos, then is not an Oinen. In fact, he was davening mincha. So once you're davening mincha, say Kaddish. And that is exactly the sheet of the Taz and Yeridei Shinai involved Sif Kot and Dalid, that an Oinen on Shabbos, who's davening anyhow, should say Kaddish. Frek the Shach in the Kudas HaKesef on the page, what do you mean Kaddish? Kaddish inappropriate. If there's no Kfura, there's no Gehenim. If there's no Gehenim, why say Kaddish? However, most poskim, earlier poskim and later poskim, the Kitzim, Mishnah Berurah, and the Aruch HaShulchan, all poskim like the Taz, that he does say Kaddish. The Shach's Kasha, there's no Gehenim. Teretz is very posh, like we said. It's not only the Gehenim, but Kaddish is also schusim for Gan Eden. And that's why it seems that the minhag in most places, I'm not going to say everything in Avelis is minhag, but our poskim, Kitzur Shulchan, Mishnah Berurah, Aruch HaShulchan, all poskim like the Taz, that in a case where there was not yet the Kfura, and on Shabbos he's doing all the mitzvahs, he should say Kaddish. Now what's interesting is the Levushay Mordechai in Kama Yerdeya, Reish Chav Gimel says a beautiful pshat. The two machloikesin are totally zeh b'zeh. The machloikis, when you stop saying Kaddish, Yom HaKfura, Yom HaMisa, and the machloikis, if you say Kaddish before the Kfura, are totally zeh b'zeh. Because if you hold like the Taz, that it's shaykh to say Kaddish before the Kfura, in other words, but as an Oinen, then you make sense, you say Kaddish, then you stop Kaddish Yom HaMisa, because they're shaykh to say Kaddish. But if you hold you never say Kaddish before Yom HaKfura, for the Kfura, then Taka, you stop saying Kaddish and you count from Yom HaKfura. But the emes is, I want to mention that I know minhagim that go with strictly with the Taz, that the Avel, the Oinen, does say Kaddish on Shabbos, and yet in spite of that, the minhag also is to say Kaddish until 11 months from Yom hakfura. Is it a stira? Not necessarily. Because if you look in the Shvus Yankiv and Aleph Ches, he says, even though there's not Gehenim yet, but la'olam yagdim adam tefillah letzorah, daven for the future. Or I saw the Divrei Malkiel and Aleph Chabei Sivka and Chaf. He says there's so much nachas ruach for the neshama and Kaddish even before the Gehenim. So it's very possible to make sort of a spalt that taka to say Kaddish even before the Kfura, even though it's an Oinen, not an Oinen yet, but even though it's before the Kfura, but the Yom Hafsaka should be 11 months from the Yom HaKfura. Just a few quick questions about the actual Kaddish. So Lamaisa, the poskim say that the minhag is, of course, even though we saw that only one person says Kaddish, but the minhag is that all the Avelim say the Kaddish together. But I want to make a point, and Rabbi Yashiv in his Sefer Tzunei Alach Amataf Ayin Beis said it's a very good idea that the Avelim should stand together. Takahir, the minhag is stand by the Amid, by the bima, and say Kaddish together. It becomes a tremendous confusion for the tzibur about answering. He's saying Kaddish, Zeh Lefanav, Zeh La'achrav. It's kedai they should make an effort to say it together. I've seen this more than once, that a person is whispering, barely pronouncing the Kaddish, he's saying it quietly. And I found out why, because he's not really a chiyuv. He's saying for an uncle or a great-grandparent, whatever it is, he's not really a chiyuv. He doesn't want to take away from a real avol's Kaddish, which is a very nice bin adam l'chaveirei, very wonderful. But the binyan tzion in the tshuva simikuf chav beis b'tzeil hachachman hey kuf lamed hey, and others also say this, that if no one hears your Kaddish, so it's not a Kaddish, so why are you wasting your time? His cheshbon was, I'm saying it with the regular Avelim, and they're answering on everybody, so it's also my Kaddish. But binyan tzion, b'tzeil hachachman, others say, if they don't hear you, they're not answering. So either don't say, or say it loudly. You're distracting someone else, but if you feel you have to say Kaddish, so you're allowed to say it. I once heard an interesting question where someone is makbid to go to a minyan that only he says Kaddish. He doesn't want to get involved with tzveikis, 2 or 3 saying together. It's very nice. But I told him, be careful, because what happens at the last minute, someone comes and says Kaddish with you. He's a right to it. His shul doesn't have a minhag dafkanat. So you're going to be upset at him. So your minhag is bringing sinas Yisrael. So Michael Tavis, if you program your mind, you'll try to chaparein, getting it, but if someone comes, it doesn't bother you. No, but often you feel resentful. So a little sinner is not worth this extra hidden. The last group of questions, basically, who do you say Kaddish for whom? So obviously, the real Kaddish is a son for a parent. That's the real bra mezaka abba, and that should always be done. If there's no son to say Kaddish, so the poskim say the father could say Kaddish for his son if it's shaykh. A brother is the next choice. Don't forget, a father is more of a kurva than a brother. And if there's no father or brother, a son-in-law is also, even though the son-in-law is not sitting shiva for the father-in-law, but the son-in-law has also the right to say Kaddish. So to say this father, brother, or son-in-law. What's probably the closest relative is an anikel. More than even a father, because an anikel is a b'nei bonim. But often the anikel has parents, and the minhag is not to say Kaddish Yasom when one has parents. And rather, some say a father has more of a kurva than an anikel, because a father sits shiva for his son. An anikel doesn't sit shiva for the zayda. So that's questionable who's first, father or anikel, but generally, b'derech klal, an anikel has his own parent, and he should not say Kaddish. If there is nobody that could say Kaddish, then you're supposed to hire someone, as we said earlier, even paying. Loyalenu, when a person is if the young, the question is, could Katanim say Kaddish? Katanim can't daven for the Amid, but that's not a problem. Because the original source, Rabbi Akiva, we can't say for sure, but it seems that it was a child on the bar mitzvah. You'll say, but if he can't be a Bal Tefillah, how could he say Kaddish? So that's Adrab. The Ramah in Shinai Vav Siv Dalet says that if someone could daven for the Amid, he should daven for the Amid, l'tayvas nishmas, his parent. He's saying Kaddish. Zok the Ramah, davening for the Amid is a bigger schus than the Kaddish, because the Kaddish Yasom was niskan for a Yasom cotton. The Ramah is saying a chiddush that the Kaddish Yasom was dafka initiated to give a cotton a chance. So obviously, if someone's a cotton, it's not a problem to say Kaddish. So basically, Ketanim do say Kaddish. The only issue is, and this is interesting, a lot is discussed about this, can a cotton shelo yagi l'chinuch say Kaddish. Because we'll say once a cotton is good, there's no difference like Yigil Chinuch. But then again, if he is not on the halachic map, it doesn't have validity to it. So how could someone answer to his Kaddish? Just like a cotton Shaloy Yigil Chinuch, says the Prima Godam, the Berurah quotes him in Reish Tezvav, Sif Cotton, on Sif Gimel, Sif Cotton Tezayim, Mr. Berurah quotes the Prima Godam. A child that's not a Yigil Chinuch, you should not say Amen to his bracha, because not a bracha. So I saw the Ba'ad Shulchan says, how could you say Kaddish how could you answer Kaddish to a cotton's Kaddish Yigil Chinuch? But the answer could be, if he's so young, and he's trained to say Kaddish, maybe he is a Yigil Chinuch. Look, he does a good job. So probably, al schus for the father, you should train him well, and make sure he says it well, and then you could answer. And just to be Messiah with a Davar Toiv, I remember vividly, it goes back probably 20 years ago, when there was the threat of Saddam Hussein, Yamach Shemoy, and if anybody that was alive then remembers, it was a very scary time in Eretz Yisrael, in America, and it was talking about Pachat Pechodim. He was threatening to do terrible, untold damage. And Abdon Segel was in America at the time, and he says he has it, and he spoke, and he said he have a tremendous eitzah, the best eitzah, avoid all sveikis, all skanas here in Eretz Yisrael. And everybody was waiting to see what's he going to do, what skula. He said, let's say Yehesh Meirabba b'chol koicha b'chol kavanasai, because the Gemara says that's current Gzar Din of 70 years. So obviously Kaddish has a lot to offer. Let's say answer Kaddish and say the Yehesh Meirabba b'kavana. It'll be great schus for Klal Yisrael. Thank you all for coming.
Shame Ergin Shirta, I'd like to give a big yasher koyach to Rav Smith for today's shir. I'd like to give a big yasher koyach to Rav Moshe Klein for sponsoring today's shir, the Nishmas Oviv, Rabbi Shol, Rav Moshe Menachem, Rav Shem Yartzeit, Vav El, Tenish Mosei, Tzura, B'tzara Chaim. First, I'd like to invite everyone to Ergin Shirta's 19th annual dinner this Wednesday on Israel Avenue K by K and East 29th Street at 7 p.m. Opportunity to help support Ergin Shirta's Habotzes HaTorah throughout the year worldwide by putting an ad in the journal. In honor of the Rabbanim, in honor of Rav Smith, whoever shiurim you enjoy, call Ergin Shirta's 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. After Minhag, Rav Smith will say the seekim of today's shir. Chananya ben Akashem, Merotz HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zachis, es Yisrael, a figure hivlim to mitzvah, shenema, Adonai Chofetz, and Matzidki, Yagdol Ter V'Yadeh. Kaddish Rabbanan. Hello,